Season 3! Season 3 is here! We made it! We're here! It's finally here! Season 3 is here! Hey everyone, we're here! It's Season 3! Season 3! We finally got Season 3! Oh my god, we got the Season 3! Fuck yeah! Season 3! God damn it! Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Evolution, which is episode 1 of season 3 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I cover episodes of Star Trek Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I'll cover the third season episode, Evolution. So Evolution is the episode where a visiting scientist comes aboard to run a once-in-a-lifetime experiment. However, the Enterprise soon suffers malfunctions that we find out is due to one of Wesley's science experiments gone awry, where he created nanites that turned into super intelligent beings that took over the Enterprise and tried to become alive, and then became their own civilization. And this interfered with the scientist's experiments. You get really upset, so he killed a bunch of these nanites to try to get rid of them. This caused the nanites to go to war with the Enterprise. But then they soon broker a peace by letting the nanites take over data so they can communicate with them, and they soon broker a peace so that the scientist can run his experiment after all, and the nanites are given their own planet where they will live in peace. So, first episode of season 3. And so excited, because the first two seasons of Next Gen are not good. Now, there is this myth, there is this falsehood, there's this fallacy going around the internet that season 2 is actually quite good. That is not the case, at least in my humble opinion. That season 2 is just as bad as season 1. Though I've heard so many people say that season 2 is so much better than season 1, but honestly, I don't see that much of a difference in quality. So I'm so happy to finally be done with both of those goddamn seasons and not have to go episode by episode to talk about terrible episodes or mediocre episodes and one or two good episodes thrown in there. Now we're getting to the good years of Trek. Not only from here on out, Star Trek Next Generation is a great show instead of a mediocre to bad show. Season 3 in particular, which is the first season that kicks this off, is my favorite season of the entire Star Trek franchise. At least that's what, when I did a video ranking all the seasons of the franchise, this is what came out of my number one. Not just Next Generation, but the entire Star Trek franchise, including modern Trek shows. So, I mean, that's just my opinion. And part of why I love season 3 so much is that it's I don't think there's really that bad of an episode in the bunch now. I might change my mind as I'm going through season 3, but I think every episode is either decent or really good, which is, I think, makes it unique to all seasons of Trek, because most seasons of Trek have at least a couple of clunkers, even really good seasons like season 6 of DS9 or season 6 of TNG or season 4 of Voyager. But not the case with this season. But anyway, so we're here to talk about the first episode of season 3, which is Evolution. Now, this was actually filmed second, but as I mentioned before, I'm going by air date for Next Gen and all the other Star Trek shows. The original series was the only one that went by production order. And apparently I lost a subscriber today because of that. They were so irate that I called The Cage the first episode. They were like, it's not the first episode. But I don't give a shit. If they want to leave, go for it. I'm still going to stick by my guns. Because my rationale for treating TNG different than TOS is that I watched them in the order they were intended to be shown, or the order in which the story that makes the most sense for the story. And watching TOS episodes in air date does not make any sense from the story, because you go back and then you go forward to wearing different uniforms. McCoy's there, McCoy's not there. It doesn't make any sense. So it made way more sense story-wise to watch TOS in production order, whereas with TNG and all the later episodes, it makes sense to watch them in air date because they actually aired them in the order they wanted you to see them. So, for example, this episode, Evolution, was the second episode to be made, mainly because the first episode that they made, Instance of Command, was, sort of cost more money. It probably had to do with scheduling because Instance of Command was on location, and Guinan was, Whoopi Goldberg has a strict schedule, and she was in this episode, so maybe it just made more sense for the production order. But it's obvious they wanted this to be the first episode to air in Season 3 because it's the first one that touches on Dr. Crusher returning, where she mentions, I've been away for a year, and that's the huge difference between Season 3 and Season 2, is that Pulaski's gone, thank God, and Dr. Crusher is back, and this episode addresses that, so it definitely makes way more sense to air this episode first, before Instance of Command, regardless in the order they were made. And that's very consistent throughout TNG. Usually if they aired it different in production order, there's a reason for that. For example, Unification Part 2 was made before Unification Part 1, but you can't air the second part before the first part. That made no sense. That's just because Leonard Nimoy's schedule. So anyway, that out of the way, excuse me, that out of the way, I still maintain, and I've heard from several other people, not just one, I'm not just talking about one person, several people, that the real growing the beard moment is comes later in Season 3 with Episode 15, Yesterday's Enterprise. And I humbly disagree. I think you're pinning it down to, you're being too specific when you pin it down that way. I think this episode is not amazing, and most people would say it's either mediocre to bad. I think it's mediocre. I think it's okay. But I would still call this episode the growing the beard moment. Now, I talked about in Season 2 how it's become an idiom. Growing the beard is the opposite of jumping the shark, where it's when a bad show gets good. But that idiom actually is misused because Riker grew his beard in Season 2, episode The Child, in Season 2, as I just said, just as bad as Season 1. So that specific idiom is incorrect. That the real growing the beard moment is this episode. Now, some people, as I said, not just one, but several had said Yesterday's Enterprise was the real growing the beard moment because that's one of the best episodes of the show, generally agreed upon. Most Star Trek fans would say is either the best or in the top 3 best. Most fans, I mean, there's always outliners, but most fans would agree. And that really is the first really, really great episode of the show. And that after it aired, they had a lot of other great episodes that aired right after it, like The Offspring and Sons of the Father, and then later you get Best of Both Worlds, which is also considered one of the best of the show. But I think that's, as I said, I think that's too specific. Because Yesterday's Enterprise is inarguably a great episode, but I would say more that is when the show hit its stride. I think when the show changed from a bad show to a good show was obviously the break in between Season 2 and 3. And I'll get more into that in this episode, even though this is kind of a mediocre episode. You can tell the quality of the writing shot way, especially, this is something I really noticed, especially going through Season 2, that there's a lot of the scripts come off as first drafts, second drafts, very poorly written from here on out, starting with this episode. That is no longer the case. And it's not just the writing, it's also the production values have shot way the fuck up. I remember I just watched a review of this episode, and they said it felt like this episode came out like 10 years after the previous episode, season 2 finale, Shades of Grey. Now, not so much in terms of story quality, but more in terms of production value. Whereas the season 2 and 1 and 2 had more grainy quality to it, whereas season 3 feels more like the picture quality is better. But not just the picture quality, there's also the lighting is better, and the reason for that is season 3 is when they first brought in the director of photography, the cinematographer Marvin Rush, who would remain the cinematographer for Star Trek for like another 10 years. I think all the way up through Enterprise he stays with Star Trek and is the primary cinematographer for the rest of the show. And he starts with this episode. And you can tell because the previous 2 seasons were using sitcom lighting. That is, and probably because they were in like such a rush to film and they wanted to do it cheaply. And what I mean by sitcom lighting is that you just flush everything in bright lights so that you can do all angles very fast. Where if you have very purposeful lighting where you want to have check the moods and, do artistic things with the lighting, you have to change the setup after every single shot, because every time you move the camera, the lighting's going to change, and so you have to change the lightings, which is very time consuming. It's something I've experienced personally, extremely time consuming, which is why they do the sitcom one, just to flush everything in a bright light. That way they can keep moving the camera and not have to worry about the lights, but it's more bland. Now, granted, they don't do that for every episode of seasons 1 and 2. There's some where they do adjust the lighting a bit, but I think for the most part, they use the sitcom lighting. And sometimes they will use the sitcom lighting going forward in season 3 and 4, to be fair. But as I said, I think, and I haven't heard this specifically, I'm just speculating here, but I would guess that when Marvin Rush came on board, that he also changed the cameras they were using. He was also apparently heard some actors talking about him that he was very particular about his cameras and he always had his eye on the camera and whatnot. And so I think that's why the picture quality went way up. So it's not just that, also the costumes. Another huge major change in season 3. They no longer had those silly one-piece costumes that look fucking ridiculous, and apparently they had them so tight on the actors because Gene Roddenberry says there will be no wrinkles in the future, which is stupid, and it made the actors complain about back pains and stuff because their costumes are so tight. So finally he gave up on that bullshit and got more practical and got, you get the Picard maneuver where he always straightens out his uniform from now on because of it. But these uniforms look so much better. 2-piece uniforms, and they don't look as silly, and you combine that with the better lighting, the better picture quality. The music is just as good. Actually, I think the music, even though the composers that score the music for season 3 are the same ones that did it for 1 and 2, Ron Jones and Dennis McCarthy. But I think they get better at it. I think they direct them more to have the music sound less cheesy. It just sounded more cheesy in seasons 1 and 2. And on top of that, I think the quality of guest actors, for the most part, improves. We got a decent guest actor in this episode. And so, and of course the writing. And now if you haven't watched it, I did a whole hour-long video about the writing of season 3, which basically because most of the writers are the same, it's just the 2 head writers, the main head writer Michael Piller and his lieutenant, for lack of a better word, Ira Stephen Bear came on, and it's the combination of these two that really, like, I think made the huge difference in writing. I think it was Maurice Hurley who was dropping the ball, and there was this, he was just being spiteful for Roddenberry, but Michael Piller saw Roddenberry's, decision to always change people's scripts or say no to everything. He took that as a challenge and actually improved his scripts because of that, and apparently was able to polish and rewrite he did a lot of rewriting for season 3, and apparently he's very fucking good at it, where Maurice Hurley was not. And so you no longer have scripts that feel like first and second drafts in season 3. All the scripts, I mean, not all of them are gold, to be fair. Some of them are mediocre, but they're all good. Like, there's no crap anymore, no sitcom tropes, or at least very blatant, very terrible sitcom tropes that Maurice Hurley seemed to be a huge fan of. And none of that going forward, so everything just improved. Everything. Like, I agree with the YouTuber who said that that feels like this episode aired 10 years after the previous episode. I completely agree. So, and this is why I think that this is the true growing the beard moment. And so I would call it the bringing the doctor back. That's what I think the idiom should be called, bringing the doctor back. Let's petition to change it to bringing the doctor back rather than growing the beard. I know Jonathan Frakes loves his beard, but this is what the moment the show really improved. And I would say Yesterday's Enterprise is an extension of that. Like, Yesterday's Enterprise is when the show hit its stride. Like, granted, the episodes before them weren't as masterpieces Yesterday's Enterprise was, but they had to build to that. The moment where the show went from a bad show to a good show is right here. Even though this episode is not that great, but everything I just said, the quality of it just shot way the fuck up. And from now on, this is why Next Generation is so beloved. This is why Next Generation is considered a great show. This is why Next Generation was such a success and had so many fans, was from this point to the end of season 7. Not those first 2 seasons that everyone has such a hard time getting through because they're not good. Anyway, yeah, so that's pretty much all I have to say about that. So let me get into this actual episode. As I said, this episode's fine, and I've always thought of it that way. It's fine or whatever. It was written by, the story was originally came up by Michael Wagner, who was the showrunner for 3 weeks. He was Maurice Hurley's replacement, but he quit after 3 weeks, and then Michael Piller took over. So Michael Piller is credited for writing the actual screenplay for this episode. So apparently Michael Wagner just came up with the basic idea, and Michael Piller is actually credited as coming up with the story as well, so he probably helped develop the story a bit. So it's really Michael Piller's script. And I've heard a lot about him saying that, I remember he was telling the story about the first time he met Gene Roddenberry, as he heard Roddenberry yelling over a table, "We need more aliens in this episode!" And because he wanted to make the main scientist, Dr. Stubs, an alien, but Michael Piller had written this great little baseball scene where he has Dr. Stubs being obsessed with baseball and making baseball metaphors, and then having, like, playing the game inside of his head or whatever. And that's because Michael Piller was a huge baseball fan, part of it. But Rick Berman also really liked this idea. He really liked the baseball metaphors. And so he was able to, he was able sometimes to smooth talk Gene Roddenberry into relenting. And apparently this was one of the cases where he was able to smooth talk Roddenberry into letting them keep this character human so they could do their baseball metaphors. And he was like, fine. Personally, I'm kind of with Roddenberry on this one. I kind of would like there to be an alien. I will admit I am biased because I am not a baseball fan. I don't watch sports at all, and I don't care about baseball, and I don't find the baseball metaphor in this episode particularly interesting, or the fact that he listens to games in the head. I think it's kind of dumb. I think that all that stuff should have went and just make him an alien instead. But, Mike Capello is such a great writer, and he saved Star Trek, so I guess I won't begrudge him his baseball love. Anyway, so did this episode say what the hell the egg was? Because I was paying attention, and I don't think they mentioned what the hell the egg was and what it does. So they said that there's this really unique stellar phenomenon where this one star is like, I can't even remember what's happening. They're putting matter, the other star drawing matter out of the other star, and the star is going to explode, and it's going to be this huge explosion of matter that they can use to lay this egg that needs like this ridiculous amount of explosion of a matter, which only happens, once every 198 years or whatever it was. And it only will happen with this unique situation. There's nowhere else in the known galaxy where they could find this explosion of matter that they need to lay the egg. So that I'm clear of. What does the egg do? That I'm not clear on. And I don't know if the episode ever mentioned that. Like, what's the purpose of the egg? They keep having Dr. Stubs being obsessed with the egg and being like, this is his life work, and he doesn't get to do it. His whole life is ruined. This is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and it has to be done. And I feel like I would feel that would mean more to me if I knew what the fuck the egg does. But I don't think they ever mentioned that. I don't know. Maybe I missed it, but if I missed it, then they really should have made it more clear. But I don't think I did. I was paying close attention. I didn't hear them say anything about what the egg actually does. If someone else caught it, you can let me know. Anyway, so let's get into the Wesley of it all. I have mixed feelings about the Wesley plot because, first of all, I'll get to what I like. I like how, and this is why I agree with their decision to make this the first episode of season 3. I like how they deal with the fact that his mother was away for a year. I like how they don't simply just, try to swipe that under the carpet. They deal with that. However, I've heard the opinion that some people were upset that this episode didn't have the fanfare or the fair that the child did, where the child went out of its way to introduce all the new shiny things. Ooh, look, here's Riker's beard, and Geordi's the chief engineer, and here's Pulaski, and here's Guinan. But I'm glad this episode didn't do that. I think that was dumb the way season 2 did that. I'm glad that they just treated this like a normal, everyday episode. And they didn't make a huge deal out of Dr. Crusher returning and have her step back on the Enterprise and everyone cheer and be like, oh, it's so great to see you. We don't need that. But we do need an acknowledgement that she was away, which is what she says. They have her show up and she's, Dr. Stubs is like, oh, I can't believe you serve on a starship with your own mother. I would never do that. And she was like, well, I was away for a year, but I'm back now. I think that's beautiful. I think, and get another prime example of how the writing in season 3 is so much better than the writing in season 2. That's such a sly, subtle way to say, hey, look, Dr. Crusher's back, without making such a big fucking deal out of it and grinding the episode to a halt. I think it's brilliant, personally. But anyway, so yeah, I like how they deal with, and they deal with the effect that Wesley have. I think the interactions between Beverly and Wesley in this episode are probably some of the best, actually, mother-son relationship they had with these two characters in the entire show. So I do think is a huge highlight of this episode, how she's worried that he's just throwing himself in his work and overworking himself and not living a life. And to be fair, that's a good, legitimate concern to have about Wesley in particular, who is a bit of a nerd and you know, always saving the day or whatever. And so I love the conversation that Dr. Crusher has with Picard, where she's like, tell me about him. And Picard's like, oh, he's a good student. He does all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. He's a hard worker. And Beverly's like, no, tell me about him. Like, that was a good scene. That was a really, really good scene. And she's like asking about his personal life and they basically conclude he doesn't have one. And then she's concerned about him. And then in this episode, she sees him overworking again, but she's not aware of the fact that Wesley's like freaking out because he thinks he is responsible for all the malfunctions that are going on in the ship. And he's right. And so he's trying to look into that, and he's like, doesn't want anyone to know. He's too scared that they'll find out. And so but she doesn't know this, and so she pressures him, and he gets pissed off by the pressure and eventually explodes and says, how would you know? You weren't even here. That's beautiful. This is such a good scene. I love that interaction because that is acknowledging the fact that she was gone for a whole year and he was on the ship by himself, and how any teenager might resent that and being a bit upset over that and a bit angsty over that. Although she wanted him to come with her, he's the one that decided to stay on the Enterprise. But anyway, but still, makes sense from a teenager's point of view. And then they have that conflict, but then she pressures him. She's like, I'm here now, and I'm willing to help you. And that's when he buckles and gives in and tells her what really happened. Again, such beautiful character interactions, which you would not get this. Very rare occasion would you get stuff of this quality in seasons 1 and 2. Sorry, but no. This is what Michael Piller brings to the show. He says this himself. He knew nothing of sci-fi. He didn't have any background in sci-fi, but he knows characters. So here on out, you get great character moments like this. It's just the difference is night and day from season 3 to season 2. Anyway, sorry, I just can't stop saying that. Anywho, so you get that great character interaction between Beverly and Wesley, which is really good. So that's what I like about the Wesley storyline. Now let me get to what I don't like. Now, someone did point out that Wesley isn't necessarily being a Mary Sue in this episode because he is the one who put the ship in danger because he fucked up. But it's still portraying them as this super genius who is doing a science experiment for school and just accidentally creates an entire civilization of intelligent beings. That makes him as a Mary Sue. I don't care that he put the Enterprise in danger because he fucked up. The fact that he's able to create an entire civilization of intelligent beings is way to the level of Mary Sue-ness, like even probably the most Mary Sue-ness we ever got of him in this show up to this point. And it's like, it reminds me of Lisa Simpson. She did this science experiment for school, and she created like this tiny little world on like this tooth just because she put a tooth in soda. But that's okay because that's a comedy. It's meant to be stupid and silly and not make any sense. But this is supposed to be a serious drama. And the fact that just because he has these two nanites together, all of a sudden he creates a civilization of super smart nanites. No, just no. This is probably the most offensive Mary Sue moment of Wesley for me in the entire goddamn show. I don't care that he fucked up, but the fact that, he accidentally created an entire civilization is stupid. It's very stupid. It's just a goddamn science experiment. So that's the part of the Wesley storyline that pisses me off. But putting my hatred of that aside, I think it is interesting the way they deal with it. I like the conflict between Stubs and the rest of the crew, how he's obsessed to a very unhealthy degree with doing this experiment, and we get the scene where he's in the ready room arguing with the crew, and he says, I'd rather die than not run the experiment. I think his interactions with Troy is a bit too over the top for me. Maybe he's like, get out of my head, counselor. And I'm like, just calm down. Like, that seems a bit OTT for me. So then there's the actor that plays Dr. Stubs, which is Ken Jenkins, and he does a really, really good job. Now, most people might recognize him from Scrubs, where he played Dr. Kelso. I was never a huge fan of that show. I didn't really like it. I saw a couple episodes. I didn't think it was funny. But I actually recognize him from a show called Homefront, which I actually saw before I saw this episode. So when I saw this episode, I was like, hey, it's the dude from Homefront. Now, if you've never heard of Homefront, which I think you probably haven't, it was a show that was on from 91 to 96 on ABC. It was a drama show about these veterans returning home from World War II and then assimilating back into civilian life. And I always remembered its theme song was the Straighten Up and Fly Right, dun, dun. That's where I knew the song from. But anyway, I remember Ken Jenkins played, his character was very memorable because he played like a father of one of the characters, and he was a huge asshole to all the characters. He was a bigot. He was just like this grumpy old man, and that's what I remember him from. So it was weird seeing him play this decent guy in this episode. At least he was definitely decent compared to the character he played in Homefront. But yeah, he is a really good actor, and I think he did a really good job in this role. Like, I do love these sort of interactions with him sort of saying, just kill them. It's just an infestation. We need to get this fucking experiment done. Who cares about these fucking things? To the point where he takes the phaser and just kills a bunch of them, and thus proving the theory that these actually are intelligent beings. And I love how Data points that out. He's like, actually, you just proved that our theory is correct, because they, their first reaction after you killed a whole bunch of them was to try to kill us. So that shows that they are intelligent in thinking. And that's actually really interesting. And so then we get the scene with, they go after Stubs specifically, too, and try to kill him. They recognize him specifically as the one. In fact, I wonder if it's a coincidence, because as soon as Picard, chastised Stubs and sent him to his quarters to be under guard, the nanites stopped attacking the bridge and stopped trying to kill them. So I think that was intentional. I think they're that intelligent that they could tell that Stubs was particularly the one who did it, and when Picard proved that he didn't support it, that's when they stopped trying to attack them. I think that's a nice little touch. Now, then they bring Stubs. They've Data volunteers to have the nanites, enter him, and so they could talk through him. And I actually think Brent Spiner does a really good job switching from Data to the nanites. He's a lot more sort of robotic, and it seems like more childlike and more sort of naive. And just his mannerisms and the way he speaks is totally different. I think it's a really good performance. And then they, when he sees Stubs, he's like, I'm the one that killed a bunch of people. And he's like, yeah, we know who you are. And his response is, it's my fault. I apologize. I shouldn't have done it. I'm at your mercy. And he's basically willing to sacrifice himself. He's owning up to his mistake. And Picard, and he was like, what does at your mercy mean? And Picard downplays it. It's like, it means he wants your forgiveness. No, it means he's offering you himself offer as a sacrifice, but Picard didn't want to say that. And I think that's cool, and that makes sense for Picard. And so instead, so they come to a peace agreement. Now, I've heard the complaint that the storyline is resolved too easily and too quickly, But I don't know. I mean, I can kind of see that point of view. Kind of. But I actually am ultimately okay with it. I'm ultimately fine with it because that's the whole point of Star Trek and Picard, is to make peace and negotiate, and that's what they do. And they decide to give the nanites their own planet. Like, again, Wesley created an entire civilization. There's going to be a whole planet of beings that only exist because Wesley created them. But anyway, and then Dr. Stubs gets to run his experiment, which I still don't know what the fuck that thing does. But yeah. But he manages to run the experiment. So, yeah, all in all, I think, as I said, this isn't a masterpiece, or definitely not one of my favorite episodes, but I think it's a decent one. So, now, I would like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the show, and I am very thankful, very humbled by your support. So I'll just give a shout out for all those that support me. We have Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joe Lavals, Alessandro Migalacio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal House. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. And yes, I'm going to keep drinking. I'm celebrating, damn it. Anyway. Alright, so we have a few patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091 that says, crazy to see what Dr. Kelso was up to before becoming chief medicine at Sacred Heart. As I said, I'm not that familiar with Scrubs. Didn't really like this show. Honestly, didn't like it. But I like watching those compilations from that one asshole doctor. Not Kelso, but the other one. I can't remember his name. Where he says no. And there's like, you go on YouTube and there's all these different compilations of him saying no in different ways. I think it was just one scene where he had said no in like multiple different ways. He was like, yet. What? No way, Jose. No way, no chance, Lance. Whatever. I watched that thing a lot. But other than that, not a huge fan of the show. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, finally, to be in season 3, thank God. Now the show gets good. However, I do have to admit that this is probably my least favorite episode of the season, which is by no means terrible. Just this isn't the top tier the season will be. First of all, it was a great decision to bring back Dr. Crusher. Finally, no more Pulaski. Hooray! Hooray on that. I'm so happy. Anyway, the plot itself is averagely good. Like, I found it a good concept, and the execution was good. The concept of this small aliens invaded the ship, the Enterprise, and then when in contact has been established, it was resolved. So like I said, an okay episode, and I do believe this is the only Star Trek season, period, in the entire franchise to not have any bad or terrible episodes. So my rating is a 6 out of 10. So Ricky, we are in agreement about season 3, that I think it is the only season in the entire franchise that doesn't have any bad episodes in it. However, this isn't my least favorite of this season. I think that's either going to be The Price or Menage a Troy. What do those two episodes have in common? Could it be the Ferengi? So either one of those two is probably be my least favorite of season 3. But yeah, this one I come to appreciate more, especially after this rewatch. Anyway, last comment is from Brandon Neal Howes that says, I always get this episode mixed up with the one about the exocomps. Let's be honest here. This is a slightly different take on home soil. Not very interesting. The only character with any sense is Worf, who advises Data being a translator for the nanites. Paul Stubbs is not a nice person, and I'm glad he gets zapped. I have always found his apology unbelievable because it is too quick. I wonder if the nanites are related to the Borg or ST eels in The Wrath of Khan. I could have done without Guinan's Frankenstein reference and Beverly's corny worrying about Wesley when he embraces a girl. This could have been a much better story if the writers had taken time to write a better script, and that angers me. Fun fact, Wesley's friend Eric in 10 Forward is Scott Grimes, who later played Gordon Malloy in The Orville. I think I heard about that. I totally forgot about it, but I think I saw an interview with him once where he pointed out that he was on Next Generation once. Anyway, 3 bad eggs out of 10. I wish they told me what the freaking egg was. That's what pisses me off the most about this episode. What does the egg do? Anyway, so Brendan, of course, appreciate your support, especially, you supported me so much throughout the years, but I do humbly disagree with you, and that's okay. We're allowed to disagree about this episode. I've heard the reference to home soil before, and I don't see it. I'm sorry. I see home soil as just like Devil in the Dark, but to me it's a totally different situation where it's more of a Devil in the Dark thing where they go to the planet, and if there's a scientist or workers, whatever the case may be, on the planet who are inadvertently killing this alien race because they don't know it's there, whereas that doesn't happen here. Like, they don't inadvertently kill the nanites. Like, Dr. Stubs does it on purpose. Like, he doesn't think they're intelligent, but the others, people in the crew are like, oh, wait, hold off. So, I don't know. I don't think these episodes are anything alike, and I think that this is far superior to Home Soil. I'm sorry, I do. I think this episode is, in every way, is far superior to Home Soil, but that's just my humble opinion. What else was there? Let's see. Oh yeah, the nanites being compared to the Borg. I've heard that before. In fact, there's fan theories out there that maybe the nanites, when they went to this planet, whatever, they travel back in time and became the Borg, and that's this is the Borg origin story. That's a crazy fan theory. I don't really think they have anything alike, but they're both collective. As soon as they said collective consciousness, I was like, wait a second, the Borg? But anyway, City Eels, I don't get the reference. I don't see the comparison to the City Eels. You'll have to enlighten me on that one. And Guinan's Frankenstein reference kind of annoyed me too. I think that was a bit silly. And I didn't talk about Beverly, the ending with Beverly worrying about Wesley. I actually kind of like that. I'm sorry. I did kind of like that where she saw Wesley walk in with a group of friends and particularly hanging out with this girl. And she was like, see, that's healthy. That's great. And then she was like, who is she? Went the guy and tell me everything you know about her. I actually thought that was funny. And you know what? I wish that they actually explored who this girl was and made this a recurring character with Wesley having a girlfriend instead of just making it a one-off gag at the end of the episode. I wish they actually followed up on that. But that would be my main complaint about it. But anyway. Okay, so we have another comment by Norman Buchwald, who says, a decision was made to make this the opening season episode, and compared to what was coming up, it was okay, though certainly miles better than what we saw in the previous Shades of Grey, of course. Is this the first episode Wesley finally messes up? Still interesting, and especially using him as a comparison to the scientist like him that's involved. I admit Data used as an agent worked well, and this time at least I don't think Brent Spiner hammed it up. As for reintroducing Beverly, I think they could have done something different. Yes, she was back, but at the same time, in the Berman rule of episodic television, nothing grand. It was like she was just there, and I think that hampered the episode, especially since this was one originally was not planned to be the season opener. I'll give it 6 nanites out of 10. Well, I already said I, kind of disagreed with the Beverly thing. I think they handled that. I like the way they handled it. Maybe it could have been done better, but I love that they didn't make a huge fanfare out of it, and they were just like, she's here, she's back. And I think this makes much more sense as the first episode of season 3, because, they touch on the fact that the Beverly came back. And I don't know if is this the first time Wesley messes up? I'm trying to think. I think like there was a time in season 2 where he messed up, and I can't remember what episode that was, but I'm sure there was a time where he messed up. Maybe the Daffin. I'm thinking of the Daffin because he was like fucking up because he was distracted by the hot girl that he had the hots for, and he kept messing up, and Jordy had to send him away. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Of course, this is a much bigger fuck up where he like nearly destroyed the whole ship. But then again, as I mentioned before, he's also a super genius who created an entire civilization. So yeah, that will still irritate me no matter what. Anyway, thank you all for your comments. So my rating for Evolution out of 10 is going to be a 7. Very good. Now, I kind of torn between a 6 and a 7. Historically, I've given this episode a 6 before. That was my official rating previously, but I think I'm going to go up a little bit, just a very low 7. But I think talking about the Wesley-Beverly relationship and how good that was and how great of a reintroduction of bringing the Doctor back is, makes me appreciate this episode more. And the storyline with the nanites, I think, was very interesting. Hearing the computer, fuck up. It reminded me a bit of Contagion, but I think it's different enough to not be exactly the same thing. But them blasting the Stars and Stripes forever when he asked for something, like, it was a pretty cool scene. And I think Dr. Stubs, as I said, was an interesting antagonist. Or sort of thorn in the side or whatever, and I think he was a totally, again, fully fleshed out, fully formed, good acted guest star, which is something that we haven't seen on Next Generation very often in the previous 2 shitty seasons. So, and maybe I'm just so enamored with seeing the show go so far up in quality in just one episode, that I'm being willing to be generous and give this a 7, because yes, the Wesley being a super genius Mary Sue who creates an entire fucking civilization is very annoying and grating on my nerves, and Dr. Stubbs' over-the-top behavior with Troy was a bit silly too, but I'm willing to overlook those things. It does prevent it from definitely getting any higher than a 7, but I'm willing to go up from a 6 to a 7. I do think this episode showcases how amazing season 3 is going to be, and it's only going to get better. Anyway, so that is it for my review of Evolution. So I will be returning with some more reviews. Let me check my schedule. I'm so happy to be in season 3. Anyway, coming out this Saturday will be my review for the first episode filmed for season 3, The Ensigns of Command. And then on Monday, I shall be doing my top 10 favorite shows of 2023. Now, in my review for Peak Performance, or even the ranking season 2 episodes, my schedule is different. So I had to change my schedule, rotate things a little bit, you might have noticed, because I had to put my top 10 shows of 2023 back a couple days, because What If season 2 doesn't finish airing until December 30th, so I wanted to have time to consider that for my top 10. Who knows if it will make it, but I want to at least have it be eligible, so I just pushed back my top 10 shows of 2023 back a few days to January 1st, New Year's, which I think is an appropriate time to air that video. So I'll be having Instance of Command instead, bringing that up forward to be on Saturday, and then on Monday will be my top 10 shows of 2023, and then Wednesday I'll be over on Patreon for a revisited for the Survivors, and then on Thursday, still remaining on Patreon, for a revisited where I revisit my review for Who Watches the Watchers. So this is another thing you'll notice about Season 3, is I have a lot more revisiteds. I hardly had any in Seasons 1 and 2 because I barely covered any episodes in those seasons because those seasons aren't good. But Season 3, which I love, I actually covered a lot of episodes already, so there will be a lot more revisited. So I guess that's the downside for those non-Patreon supporters for Season 3. But not to worry, we'll be back with more reviews for everyone. But if you do support me on Patreon, yeah, you can check out my revisiting my old reviews for the Survivors and Who Watches the Watchers. So that's what's coming up on my channel next. So be sure to check it out, as I do many more Star Trek videos and many more videos on many other shows. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot.